resuming with Beowulf then, it occurs to me that the Beowulf poet might actually have one other allusion in mind when he mentions King Heremod as the proverbially bad Danish king that preceded Scyld-Scefing, and that is that Heremod's name is basically the same name as Hermod, and Hermod is the mythical being that is sent down to the underworld to fetch Balder back from the underworld. And so it's possible that the Beowulf poet wants you to think of Heremod and Hermod's attempt, which fails ultimately to resurrect Balder. The myth of Balder, as Snorri Sturluson recounts it in the Eddas, based on apparently a lost Eddic lay, and he recounts it in his own prose Edda, is that Balder is the one god. He's had certain good dreams, and the gods have decided to bless him. So Frigg takes an oath, the goddess Frigg takes an oath from all things, anything that could possibly, conceivably do harm to anyone. Wood, stone, fire, snakes, has to take a vow to leave Balder alone. Balder is to be kept immune to everything. But he does, of course, have an Achilles heel, and Loki, when he hears this, decides that he wants to go find out about it. So meanwhile, Loki sees that they are throwing objects for fun in Valhalla at Balder, and he's immune to everything. So Loki dresses himself up in the guise of a woman to go down to visit Frigg, and he asks her, is there anything that has not taken an oath, possibly, to leave Balder alone? And she says, no, I've made everything, well, except for mistletoe. There's one thing, but that's too young and harmless to be of any consequence. So Loki immediately goes to find mistletoe, grabs a sprig of it, and brings it to the god Hod, or Hodder, as in some accounts, who is blind. And Loki asks him why he's not throwing things at Balder like everyone else is doing and having fun doing it. And Hodder says, well, I can't see and I don't have a weapon. Besides, nothing will work. And he says, here, try this. And he gives him the sprig of mistletoe, and Hodder throws it at Balder. And it's, of course, his Achilles heel, and it kills him. And he falls down dead. And everyone amongst the gods in Asgard are completely disrupted by this and this unforeseen event. Now, the question is, of course, why mistletoe? Mistletoe is an evergreen, so it's an evergreen, and it's associated then with regeneration, with fertility and regeneration. And the tradition, apparently in some accounts, the tradition was catching a girl under mistletoe during the season of Yuletide gave one the right to have sex with her. That got reduced over time to just a kiss. And so it's associated with regeneration and fertility rites. And Balder is the god of mistletoe, which has a golden hue as well, which links it to the sun. The root of his name, Baal, probably means in Indo-Aryan, Indo-Germanic root to shine, to radiate. And so he goes down to Hel, H-E-L, to the underworld, and the goddess Hel has him captive down there. And Frigg says, is there anyone who would volunteer to go down to find him and see if a ransom can be offered to the goddess Hel to let him out? And Hermod, who now has the same name as King Hermod in Beowulf, volunteers to go down and do this. And so he does it. Meanwhile, they have Balder's funeral. They have trouble with the ship. The ship is too big and they can't move it. So they have to bring in a giantess. And the giantess comes and pushes it away from the shore. Thor is tempted to smash her, but that's his immunological reaction to giants. He's always tempted to throw Mjolnir at them. The gods quell him. She's done them a favor. Then they bring the body of Balder in and put it on the ship. And then his wife Nanna sees this and falls dead of grief. So they put her on the ship as well. And they hold a big funeral, and all the gods and giants are present at this funeral. And they burn the ship and set it off onto the ocean to sail as a burning ship, which also, I mean, invites a certain amount of comparison to the two funerals that bookend Beowulf, to the funeral of Scyld-Scefing, who is put onto a ship and sent as a burial at sea, and then the funeral pyre at the end with Beowulf's body being burnt up. It does invite comparison with that. Hermod, meanwhile, has gotten onto a steed, onto a horse that Odin has given him, and he is riding down into the underworld through 9 gates, and he comes to one that's guarded by a goddess named Matgud. And she says, what are you doing here? You're a living person. You're not supposed to be down here. He says, I'm looking for Balder. Have you seen him? And she says, oh, yes, Balder has gone through here. Proceed. So he goes down, and he finally finds Balder sitting near the goddess of Hel, H-E-L, the goddess herself. And he asks her, is there some way that he could ransom something to allow her to let Balder come back to the world of the Aesir, since everyone is so distraught by this? And she says, no, not really, unless one thing, if everything agrees to weep for Balder, every single entity that is alive agrees to weep for him, then I'll let him go back up to the upper world. And so Hermod goes back to the upper world to deliver this message, and then he finally comes to a giantess named Thanks, and he says, "Why aren't you weeping for Balder?" And she says, "Well, Balder never did me any good." It's actually Loki in disguise. Balder never did me any good, so he's only going to get dry tears from me. And so Loki, in disguise as this giantess named Thanks, is the one entity who will not weep for Balder, so Balder is not resurrected. Like Orpheus going down to get Eurydice, he has to remain behind in the underworld and does not come back up. So it is possible, too, that the reference to Hermod, the Austrian scholar Franz Borkenau in his book End and Beginning, in his analysis of the Siegfried myth, suggests the possibility that Siegfried actually is Balder, or has references to Balder buried in it, especially in the version of in the Nibelungenlied, which is the late version that dates from about the year 1200. It's written by an anonymous courtly scribe that tells the myth of Siegfried and says that he was dipped in the dragon's blood. The dragon that he killed, he was dipped in the blood, and the blood caused his skin to thicken with tiny little horns and to become brittle so that it forms a skin of armor so that no sword can cut him, and he's invulnerable to anything, except for the fact that a leaf from a linden tree landed on his back and prevented the blood at that spot from touching his skin. So he does have an Achilles heel there, just as Balder does, the Achilles heel with mistletoe. And shields, of course, were made from linden, so there's that aspect of the reference to the linden tree and shields being made from linden. And here's the one spot that renders him vulnerable. And of course, Hagen, as we have said here, may be an echo of the original myth of the Nibelungs having been dwarves. Hagen is very different. He's not even a brother in this version of he's not a brother of Gunther in this version of the story, but he's the one who kills Siegfried. He finds out about the vulnerable spot on his back, which is marked with a red cross, and while Siegfried is drinking water from a brook, Hagen hurls a javelin at that spot and kills him. Very much analogous to Hodder, who is blind, and Hagen is blind in one eye, by the way, throwing mistletoe at Balder. So, but Balder is not he's not allowed to be resurrected until Ragnarok, the end of the world, when he will be brought up from hell at the end of the world, but not until then. So he doesn't get to undergo the cycle of death, rebirth, that we find in the ancient Near Eastern gods with Dionysus and Tammuz, Dumuzi, and Osiris and all of that. He simply dies once and is resurrected once at the Day of Judgment with the end of the world. So it is possible that the Siegfried mythos, especially in the version in the Nibelungenlied, does contain references to the Balder myth. And that conversely with Beowulf and the reference to King Hermod, there may be a reference there too to the possibility of resurrection, since Beowulf on the third day, as he is staying with the Danes on the third day, fights Grendel's mother at night on the second day, and then he descends down into the underworld of the lake and is resurrected on the third day, just as Christ on the third day is resurrected on Easter Sunday and comes back from the dead. So there may be a reference hidden in all of this to the portention of the resurrection of Beowulf from his fight with Grendel's mother and coming up on the third day. Possible. This is a very erudite poet, whoever this man was, so it's possible that he intended these references in here. And so then, now continuing with the text, we have, now and then the brave men raced their horses, ate up the sandy tracks, and they were so absorbed that the hours passed easily. Stout-hearted warriors without number traveled to the high hall to inspect that wonder. The king himself, too, glorious Hrothgar, guardian of ring hoards, came from his quarters with a great company, escorted his queen and her retinue of maidens into the mead hall. Hrothgar spoke. He approached Heorot, stood on the steps, stared at the high roof adorned with gold, and at Grendel's hand. It must be hanging from the rafters there, swinging. Let us give thanks at once to God Almighty for this sight. I have undergone many afflictions, grievous outrages at Grendel's hands, but God, guardian of heaven, can work wonder upon wonder. Until now I had been resigned, had no longer believed that my afflictions would ever end. This finest of buildings stood stained with battle blood, a source of sorrow to my counselors. They all despaired of regaining this hall for many years to come, of guarding it from foes, from devils and demons. Yet now one warrior alone, through the Almighty's power, has succeeded where we failed for all our fine plans. Indeed, if she is still alive, that woman, whoever she was, who gave birth to such a son, to be one of humankind, may claim that the Creator was gracious to her in her childbearing. And we still don't know who Beowulf's mother was. We're not given her name. She's married to Ecgtheow, but she is the sister of the three brothers, the sons of Hrethel. But we don't know her name. And it's interesting that he mentions the possibility of Beowulf's mother, whoever she was, must have been blessed at a party and a celebration that takes place on the day of which that night Grendel's mother will come and show up as an ironic counter contrast to Beowulf's mother, the good mother versus the bad mother. Now, Beowulf, best of men, I will love you in my heart like a son. Keep to our new kinship from this day on. You shall lack no earthly riches I can offer you. Most often I have honored a man for less, given treasure to a poor warrior, more sluggish in the fight. Through your deeds you have ensured that your glorious name will endure forever. May the Almighty grant you good fortune, as he has always done before. And then it says that Beowulf, the son of Ecgtheow, answered, we performed that dangerous deed with good will. At peril we pitted ourselves against the unknown. Notice that he includes himself with the other 14 warriors that he was with, even though they didn't really help him. It was pretty much a single-handed contest. I wish so much that you could have seen him for yourself, that fiend in his trappings and the throes of death. I meant to throttle him on that bed of slaughter as swiftly as possible with savage grips, to hear death rattle in his throat because of my grasp, unless he should escape me. But I could not detain him. The Lord did not ordain it. I did not hold my deadly enemy firm enough for that. The fiend jerked free with immense power. This note is his first recap, his first report, as he gives to Hrothgar here, and later he will give a report of the whole thing, including the killing of the mother, Grendel's mother, to Hugelac. But this is the first looking back over the past of this event and reporting it, beginning to translate it into myth, in other words. Yet, so as to save his life, he left behind his hand, his arm and shoulder, but the wretched monster has brought himself scant respite. The evil marauder, tortured by his sins, will not live the longer, but agony embraces him in its deadly bonds, squeezes life out of his lungs, and now this creature stained with crime must await the day of judgment and his just deserts from the glorious Creator. And so we'll leave it there for this installment.